Chapter 7. The Secret War on Vedic Rus. The war with Vedic Rus began long before Jesus' appearance on the earth, long before the fall of Rome. This 1,000-year war was not waged with iron swords. Occultism executed its military raids on a non-material plane. Preachers of the occult religion came to Russia. Dozens of their names are mentioned in various ecclesiastical books, but they actually numbered in the tens of thousands. They were not to blame for their ignorance. They were fanatics, which means their mind was unable to fathom even the millionth part of creation. As foot soldiers to the priest, reverently carrying out his orders without so much as a murmur, they attempted to explain to people how to live. They tended to say exactly the same things they had said when preaching to once majestic imperial Rome. They tried introducing ritual and proposed the construction of temples instead of paying attention to nature or earthly existence. Then the kingdom of heaven would come for everyone. I shall not burden you by reciting their sermons. If you wish, you can still read their words today. I shall tell you why for thousands of years they did not succeed in doing anything with Vedic Rus. Every other person living in Rus at that time was a poet and a wit. And there were bards in Rus. They were called Bayans back then. And this is how it all took place in those times. For decades, the priests' foot soldiers waged a propaganda campaign to the effect that God had to be bowed down to, and here and there people began to listen and reflect on the message. Upon seeing this, the Bayan would simply laugh and make up a parable, which he would then sing, and the parable would quickly spread throughout Rus, and over the next 10 years or so, Rus would have a good laugh at the priest's sermons. The priest was furious and launched new attacks. But once again, in Rus, a parable would be born, and Rus would laugh once more. Of all the many parables of those times, I shall tell you just 3. In which temple should God dwell? Anastasia's first parable. In one of the many populated settlements on the earth, people went happily about their daily life. In this particular community lived 99 families. Each family lived in a splendid house decorated with fanciful wood carvings. The garden around the house brought forth fruit every year in abundance. Vegetables and berries grew all by themselves. Every year, people met the spring with joyful greeting and delighted in the summer. A series of cheerful friendship celebrations brought forth songs and korovads. In the wintertime, people rested from their daily exhilarations, and they looked up to the heavens and tried to decide whether they might be able to weave the moon and the stars into even better patterns. Once every 3 years, in July, those people gathered in a glade at the edge of their community. Once in every 3 years, God would respond to their questions in an ordinary voice. Even though he remained invisible to ordinary eyes, each one could feel him. And he, together with all the residents of the community, decided how best to build their life in the days to come. The people's conversation with God might be philosophical, but sometimes quite simple and even funny. So, for example, one middle-aged man stood up and addressed God this way: "Come on now, God. For our celebration this year, when we all gathered together with the dawn, you decided to drench us all with a monsoon. The rain poured down like a waterfall from heaven, and the sun began to shine only around noon. What? Did you sleep in till noon?" "I was not asleep," God replied. "At this morning's dawn, I thought about how to make your celebration truly glorified. I saw how some of you on their way to the celebration were too lazy to wash themselves with clean water. How so? Such reprobates would spoil the show with their appearance. And so I decided to first wash everyone, and then have the clouds sweep in and allow the rays of the sun to caress the water-washed bodies with tenderness. Well, okay, if that is how the man agreed, brushing off food crumbs from his moustache and wiping the blackberry stains from his son's mouth. Tell me, God, asked an elderly and pensive philosopher, there are many stars shining in the sky overhead. What does their fanciful alignment mean? If I should select a star that is pleasing to my soul, and then when I get bored with my earthly life, could I remove there with my family? The alignment of the heavenly bodies twinkling in the dark tells about life of the whole universe. An alertness in your soul, but without tension, allows you to read the book of heavens. This book will not open for idleness or curiosity, but only for pure and meaningful thoughts. And yes, you can settle on a star, and each of you can choose for yourself a planet in the heavens. There is only one condition that you must observe. You must become capable of producing on your selected star creations more perfected than those produced on the earth. A very young girl jumped up from the ground and tossed her light brown braid of hair over her shoulder. Raising a little face with its upturned nose heavenward, she placed her hands saucily on her hips and suddenly declared to God, I have a complaint to make to you, God. For 2 years now, I've waited patiently to tell you about it. Now I shall tell you. Some kind of disorder or abnormality is taking place on Earth. All the people are living as people, falling in love, marrying, and being happy. But am I to blame for something? Every year, just as soon as spring arrives, my cheeks break out into freckles. There is nothing that'll wash them off, and I can't paint over them. Did you think this up as some kind of a joke, God? I demand that as of next spring, not a single freckle ever appears on my face again. Oh, my daughter, those are not freckles, but spring speckles that appear on your beautiful little face each spring. But I shall call them as you wish. If you find your freckles to be such an annoyance, I shall remove them come next spring, God answered the spunky girl. But then a handsome young lad got up at the other end of the glade and meekly addressed God, though not in a loud voice. We have a lot of work ahead of us in the springtime. You, God, try to take part in everything we do. Why would you waste your time on removing her freckles? Besides, they are so beautiful that I cannot picture a more beautiful image than a young maiden without freckles in the spring. So, what am I to do? God thoughtfully responded. The maiden asked, and I promised her. What's this about what to do? The girl once more broke into the conversation. You heard the people say it's not freckles, but other more important things that we should be concerned about. But while we're on the subject of speckles, I'd like to ask for 2 more right here on my right cheek, so that it's all symmetrical. God smiled. This was evident from the fact that all the people were smiling. Everybody knew that it would not be long before a new splendid family would be lovingly born into their community. Oh, so the people lived with God in that remarkable community, and then one day 100 wise men came to see them. The hospitable residents always greeted guests with all kinds of good things to eat. The wise men tasted their splendid fruit and were amazed at its extraordinary flavour. Then one of them said, Oh, people, what a splendid, orderly life you lead. You have abundance and coziness in every home. But your communication with God lacks sophistication. There is no glorification or adulation of deity. But why? The residents tried to protest in alarm. We talk with God the way we talk with each other. We talk and reason with him every 3 years. But every day he rises with the sun. As a bee, he busies himself around the gardens, beginning in every spring. Every winter he covers the ground with snow. His tasks are clear to us, and we are glad for all the seasons. You are doing things the wrong way, said the wise man. We have come to teach you how to talk with God. All over the earth, an array of temples and palaces has been built in his honour, where people can talk with God every day, and we shall teach you to do the same. For 3 years, the residents of the settlement heeded the words of the wise men. Each of the 100 insisted on his own theory about how to best construct a temple to God and what should be done in the temple each day. Each of the wise men had his own theory. The residents of the community had no idea which of the 100 wise theories they should choose. Besides, how could they choose without offending the wise men? And so they decided to heed them all and build all the temples proposed, one for each family. But there were only 99 families in the village, and there were 100 wise men. When they heard the decision of all the residents, the wise men became very concerned. It meant one of them would not get his temple built and would not receive the anticipated offerings. And they began arguing among themselves as to whose theory of worshipping God was the most effective. And they began dragging the residents into dispute. The dispute heated up, and for the first time in many years, the villagers forgot about their time of communication with God. They did not gather as before in the glade on the appointed day. Another 3 years went by. 99 magnificent temples were scattered about the settlement, and it was only the villagers' huts that had lost their lustre. Some of the vegetables lay uncollected on the ground, and the fruit of the garden began to become infested with worms. This is all because, the wise men preached in the various temples, you do not have full faith. Bring more and more gifts to the temple. Try harder and bow down to God more often. But there was one wise man, the one who had been left without a temple, who whispered first to one, then to another. You have been going about everything the wrong way, people. All the temples you have built are of the wrong construction, and you do not worship the right way in your temples. You are not saying the right words as you pray. I am the only one who can teach you how you can communicate with God every day. Just as soon as he managed to bring someone over to his side, a new temple and one of the existing ones would fall into disrepair. And again, one newly deprived of the people's offerings tried to surreptitiously slander the others in front of the villagers. A number of years passed. Then one day, the people remembered about the gatherings they used to have in the glade, where they heard God's voice. Once again they gathered in the glade and began asking questions in the hope that God would hear them and give an answer as before. Answer us! How did it happen that our gardens are bringing forth worm-infested fruit? And why did our vegetables no longer yield an abundant harvest every year? And why do people quarrel, fight and argue amongst themselves, but cannot possibly choose the best faith? Tell us, in which of the temples we built for you do you dwell? For a long time God did not answer their questions, and when a voice finally sounded in space, it was not a happy voice, it sounded weary. God answered those gathered. My sons and daughters, the reason for the desolation in your houses and the gardens around them is that I am simply not able to do everything by myself. Everything has been designed by my dream right from the start in such a way that I can create splendor only in conjunction with you. But you have, in part, turned away from your homes with their gardens. Creation is something I cannot ever manage on my own. There must be co-creation by the two of us together. Moreover, I want to say to you all, you yourselves include love and freedom of choice, and I am ready to follow your aspirations with my dream. But you must tell me, my dear daughters and sons, in which of the temples I am to dwell. Before me, you are all of equal worth. So whereabouts should I reside so that no one feels left out? When you have decided on your own in which of the temples I should make my home, I shall be glad to follow your collective will. After responding to all with these words, God fell silent. The people of the once beautiful village are continuing their conflict even to this day. Yep. Their houses are filled with desolation and dust. Around them the temples rise higher and higher, even as the conflict grows bitterer and bitterer. Well, Anastasia, that is quite an unrealistic fairy tale parable you told. There must have been some pretty dumb people in that settlement. Didn't they realise that God wants to work with each one of them to care for their garden? Besides, you say that those dullards in the settlement are still arguing even today. And where is that settlement? In what country? Can you tell me? I can. Then tell me. Vladimir, you, along with people from different lands, are living in this very settlement right now. Eh? Oh, I see. Precisely. We are the ones. We are still engaged in a dispute about whose faith is better, while our gardens are full of worm-infested fruit. Second parable, the best place in paradise. I wonder if I should stop it, I'll carry on. 4 brothers came to a grave site to honour the memory of their father, who had died many years before. The brothers wanted to know whether his soul was dwelling in paradise or in hell. They were all eager for the father's spirit to appear before them and tell how it was doing in the next world. Their father's image appeared before them in a wondrous radiance. The brothers were awed, and their hearts were afire when they saw this miraculous vision. When they finally regained their composure, they inquired, "Tell us, father, does your soul dwell in paradise?" "Yes, my sons," their father replied. "My soul delights in a wondrous paradise." "Tell us, father," the brothers started asking, "what fate awaits our souls after our own flesh dies?" And the father responded to each of his sons in turn with a question of his own. "Tell me, my sons, how do you appraise your deeds to date upon the earth?" And each brother answered his father in turn. The elder son began. "I have become a great military leader, father. I have defended my native land against its foes and never allowed an enemy foot to tread upon it. I have never offended the poor and the infirm. I have endeavoured to take good care of the soldiers under my command. I have always honoured God, and therefore I hope to enter into paradise." The second son replied to his father, "I have become a prominent preacher. I have preached goodness to the people. I have taught them to worship God. I have reached great heights and achieved high standing among my peers, and therefore I hope to enter into paradise." The third son replied to his father, "I have become a prominent scientist. I have designed a great many devices to benefit people's lives. I have raised a large number of handsome buildings for mankind. Each time I start a new construction project, I give praise to God and celebrate and honour his name, and therefore I hope to enter into paradise." The youngest brother answered his father, "I, father, cultivate a garden and work daily at raising vegetables. From my splendid garden I send fruits and vegetables to my brothers and try not to do anything dishonourable or displeasing to God, and therefore I hope to enter into paradise." The father replied to his sons, "Your souls, my sons, will indeed dwell in paradise after your flesh dies." The vision of their father faded. Years went by, the brothers died, and their souls met in the garden of paradise. Only the soul of their younger brother was not among them. The 3 brothers then began to call out to their father, and when he once again appeared before them in his wondrous radiance, they asked him, "Tell us, father, why is the soul of our little brother not among us in this garden of paradise? It's been 100 earthly years since we last spoke to you at your graveside." "Do not be concerned, my sons," replied the father. "Your little brother's soul, too, is dwelling in the garden of paradise. Only he is not here with you right now because your little brother is at this moment communicating with God." Another 100 years went by, and once again the brothers met in the garden of paradise. But again their younger brother was not with them, and again the brothers called for their father. When he appeared, they asked, "See, Another 100 years has gone by, but our little brother has not come to meet us, nor has anyone seen him in the garden of paradise. Tell us, Father, where is our little brother now?" And the father answered his 3 sons, "Your little brother is communicating with God, and that is why he is not among you." And the 3 brothers began asking their father to show them where and how their younger brother was communicating with God. "Take a look," the father replied, and the brothers saw the earth, and there was the marvellous garden which their little brother had cultivated during his life. In this wondrous earthly garden, their brother, looking so much younger, was explaining something to his child. His beautiful wife was busying herself nearby. The brothers asked their father in astonishment, "There is our little brother in his earthly garden as before, not in the garden of paradise as we are. What is he to blame for before God? Why has his flesh not died? Several centuries have passed in earth years, and here we see him as a young man. Does that mean God has somehow changed the order of the universe?" And the father answered his 3 sons, "God has not changed the order of the universe, which he established right from the start in great harmony and inspired love. Your brother's flesh has died, and on more than one occasion, but the place of one's soul in the garden of paradise is best created by one's own hands and soul. Just as for any loving mother and father, the child of their own creation is always the most glorious. According to the divine order of things, the soul of your little brother should assuredly be granted entrance to the garden of paradise. But seeing this garden on the earth, it is immediately incorporated into a new body in the earthly garden so dear to it. Tell us, Father, the brothers went on, you were saying that our little brother is communicating with God, but we do not see God with him in his garden. And the father responded to his 3 sons, "Your little brother, my sons, is looking after God's creations. The trees and the grass, they are the Creator's own materialized thoughts. In treating them with love and conscious awareness, your brother is thereby communicating with God. Tell us, Father, shall we ever return to the earth in fleshly form?" The sons asked their father, and they heard him answer, "Your souls, my sons, now dwell in the garden of paradise. They can take on earthly form only if someone creates a garden for your souls on the earth, similar to the one in paradise." The brothers exclaimed, "Gardens are not created with love for other people's souls. We ourselves, once we are given a fleshly form, shall cultivate a garden of paradise on the earth." But the father replied to his sons, "You were already given that opportunity, my sons." After this response, the father began to quietly withdraw. But once again the 3 brothers cried out and asked their father, "Dear father, show us your place in the garden of paradise. Why do you withdraw yourself from us?" The father stopped and replied to his 3 sons, "Look there. Do you see that leafy apple tree flowering beside your little brother in his garden? Under that apple tree is a little cradle, and in that cradle is the beautiful body of a tiny infant that has just wiggled its little hand as it begins to awake. My soul is alive in that little body. After all, that was the marvellous garden I began creating myself." Third parable, the wealthiest groom. I shall make a few changes in this parable to make it in modern day context. In one village lived 2 neighbours. The families were friends with each other and enjoyed working their land. Every spring, gardens bloomed on the 2 plots, and their little groves of trees grew taller. Into each family a son was born. After their sons had matured, one day, while gathered round a festive table, the fathers took a firm decision and handed everything over to their sons' control. "Let those sons of ours now decide what to sow and when," one of them said to the other, "and you and I, my friend, shall not oppose them, or even give them hints or questioning looks." "Agreed," replied the other. Let our sons even make changes around the house if they wish. Let them clothing they like, and let them decide what livestock and other things to buy. Fine, replied the first. Let our sons become self-sufficient, and let them choose worthy brides for themselves. We shall go together, my friend, to seek brides for our sons. And this is the decision that emerged from the two friends' and neighbours' conversation. Their idea was supported by their wives, and the families began living under their grown-up sons' administration. But thereafter, the two families' lives significantly diverged. In one family, the son became an active member of the community and paid his respects to every citizen, which led to his being defined as the first citizen of the village. The other son seemed to be slow and serious of mind to all around. He became to be called the village's second citizen. The first neighbour's son felled and sawed up the trees of the grove his father had planted and hauled them to market. He bought himself a family car in place of his horse, along with a small tractor. The first son here was considered very enterprising. The new entrepreneur calculated that the coming year would see a sharp increase in the price of garlic, and he was not mistaken. He pulled up all his plantings and sowed his field with garlic. His father and mother did their best to help him in everything. They'd made a promise, and it was not forsaken. The family sold the garlic at a profit. They set about building a huge mansion using the most modern materials invented and hired construction workers. And the enterprising son did not relent. He spent from morning till night trying to figure out what the most profitable crop would be to plant in the spring. And by the winter's end, he had calculated that this spring's most profitable crop would be onions. And again he sold his harvest at a profit and bought himself a fancy new car. One day the two neighbours' sons met along the road. One was driving a car, the other a wagon harnessed to a frisky mare. The successful entrepreneur stopped his car and the two neighbours had a conversation. "See, neighbour, I'm driving a fancy car, while you're getting around in a horse-drawn cart just like before. I'm building a big house, while you're still living in that old house of your father's. Our fathers and mothers have always been friends, and I too am ready to help you in a neighbourly way. If you like, I can tell you what is the most profitable crop to plant your whole field with today." "Thank you for your willingness to help," responded the second neighbour from his wagon. "Only I happen to cherish a great deal my freedom of thought, indeed I do." "I certainly don't want to encroach on your freedom of thought. It's just that I sincerely want to help you through." "I thank you for your sincerity, good neighbour. But freedom of thought is eroded by non-living things. That car, for example, you're sitting in." "How can a car erode? It can easily overtake that old farm cart of yours, and by the time you get to the city, I'll be able to have my business all taken care of. And thanks to my motor car. Yes, your car, of course, can certainly overtake my wagon, but it requires you to sit behind the wheel and hold on to it constantly as you drive, while you as the driver have to keep jerking some kind of stick with your hand and looking continuously at the road. Maybe my horse is slower than a car, but it doesn't require any, and doesn't distract my thought either. The horse will find its way home. You say you have problems with fuel, whereas my horse fills up in the pasture over there. Anyway, tell me, where are you going? Where are you in such a hurry? Where are you such a hurry to get to in your car?" "I want to buy some spare parts with my car at any moment. Oh, I want to buy some spare parts to keep on hand. I know exactly what could go wrong with my car at any moment." "So, you know enough about technology that you can accurately predict all your breakdowns?" "Yes, I'm pretty good at that. I took special mechanics courses for 3 years in all, and I swatted through. If you recall, I asked you to join me on these courses too." So for 3 years of your life, you had only this technology to give your thought to, something that can get old and break down. Your horse too will get old and die. Yes, of course, she will get old, but before that happens, she will be able to give birth to a foal. The foal will grow, and I shall be able to ride him. What is living will eternally serve man, never fear, while what is dead only shortens his years. The whole village makes fun of your ideas, remarked the entrepreneur. They all think of me as successful and wealthy, while they see you just sit and live off your father's fortune. Besides, you haven't introduced any new species of trees or bushes on your father's land, not even a bit. But I've come to love these. I've been trying to understand each one's purpose and how they interact with each other, and I've been able to invigorate the ones starting to wither just by looking at and touching them. Now, come each spring, everything is blossoming in harmony, all by itself, requiring no outside attention. It's just waiting eagerly for summer, and then for the fall, when it will offer up its fruit for the year. Really, friend, I must say you are queer, sighed the entrepreneur. You walk around entranced with your domain, your garden and your flowers. At the same time, you say you are given freedom to your thoughts. Yes, I am. What do you need a free thought for anyway? What's the point in freedom of thought? So that I can make sense of all the grand creations, so that I can be happy in myself and help you. Me? What's got hold of you? I can marry the best girl in the village. Any one of them will go for me. They all want to be rich, live in a spacious house and ride in my car. Being rich doesn't mean being happy. And being poor? Being poor isn't so good either. And so if you're not poor and not rich, then what? You ought to have just enough of everything. Being self-sufficient, that's not bad either. And be consciously aware of what's going on around. After all, it's not by chance that happiness can be found. The entrepreneur grinned and quickly went on his way. A year later, the two neighbouring fathers got together to talk. They decided it was time to be courting brides for their sons. When they asked them which of the village girls they would like to wed, the entrepreneuring son replied to his father, "The daughter of the village elder really appeals to me, father. I would rejoice to have her as my wife." "I can see, my son, that you have made an excellent choice. The village elder's daughter is renowned as the most beautiful girl in the county. All the visitors of our village, from both near and far, are entranced at the sight of her. Mind you, she can be quite capricious. The girl has a mind of her own that even her parents can't figure out. Some people might think her strange. More and more women keep coming to her from various settlements for advice to be healed by their ills, and they even bring their children to see this young girl." "What of it, father? I'm made of sterner stuff. In all our village there is no more spacious house or better car than mine. Besides, twice now I have seen her give me a long and thoughtful looks." On being asked which of the village girls he most fancied, the second son told his father, "I love the village elder's daughter, father." "And how does she act around toward you, my son? Have you noticed a look of love in her eyes?" "No, father. Whenever I happen to meet her, she lowers her eyes." Both neighbours simultaneously decided to woo the maiden for their sons. Arriving at their house, they seated themselves sedately. The village elder summoned his daughter and told her, "Look, my daughter, 2 matchmakers have come to see us, on behalf of 2 young lads, each wishing to have you to wife. The 3 of us have decided that you should choose from the 2. Can you tell us your decision now, or would you like to think about it until tomorrow morning?" "I have spent many mornings thinking about it in my dreams, father," the young girl quietly said. "I can give you my answer right now." "So tell us. We are all eagerly awaiting your decision." The beautiful girl answered the matchmakers like this: Thank you, fathers. Thank you all for inquiring. I thank your sons for desiring to join their life with mine. You have indeed raised splendid sons, and it might have been very difficult to choose to which of two destinies I should myself resign. But I do want to have children, and I want children to be happy, to stand tall in prosperity, freedom, and love. And so I have fallen in love with the one who is wealthiest of all. The father of the entrepreneur rose to his feet in pride, while the other father sat glumly in his chair. But the girl went over to the second father, knelt down before him, and said without raising her eyelids, I wish to live with your son. At this point, the village elder rose to his feet. He wanted to see his daughter living in what he deemed to by all the richest house in the village, and so he said to her rather harshly, You spoke correctly, my daughter. Your smart reasoning brought gladness to your father's heart. But you, for your part, did not go and kneel before the richest man in the village. Someone else here is the wealthiest. This is he. And the elder, gesturing to the entrepreneur's father, added, Their son has built a spacious home, honey. They have a car, a tractor, and money. The girl went over to her father and responded to his harsh and bewildering words. Of course you are right, dear papa. But I was talking about children. What use will our children have for those things you mentioned? The tractor can break down while they are still growing up. The car may rust and the house may fall into decay. That may be. Maybe what you say is true, granted. But your children will have a great deal of money, and they can buy for themselves a new tractor and a new car and new clothes. And just how much is a great deal, might I ask? The entrepreneur's father proudly stroked his beard and moustache and answered solemnly and seriously, My son has heaps of money, enough so that if he needed to buy 3 of everything our household already has, he could do so at once. And those horses our neighbour keeps, we would be able to buy not just 2, but a whole stable full. The girl meekly lowered her eyelids and responded, I wish you and your son great happiness. But there is no amount of money on the earth that would buy a father's garden, where every branch reaches out in sheer love to the one cultivating it, and no money in the world can buy the loyalty of a steed that has played with a child as a colt. Your domain may indeed make money, but my beloved's domain will make a space for sufficiency and love. A change of priestly tactics. During the 1,000-year war, the priest changed his tactics a number of times, but to no avail. Roos still laughed, as before, at his occult intrusions. The people referred to those preachers as miserable wretches. At that time, wretchedness was not equated with physical affliction, but with occultism. People in Rus took pity on the wretched preachers. They fed them and offered them shelter, but did not take any of their sermons seriously. After 400 centuries, the priest realized he would never achieve victory over the Vedic land. He accurately determined wherein the extraordinary power of Vedism lay. Vedism is based solidly on a divine culture. Everyone's way of life was divine, and every family created in its domain a space of love. They felt the wholeness of nature, and consequently of everything God had created. What happened in Vedism was that people spoke with God through nature. Instead of bowing down before him, they attempted to understand him. They loved God as a son and daughter love their kindly parents. And so the priest came up with a plan which would be able to break this dialogue with the divine. To this end, it was necessary to separate people from their domains, from the divine gardens, from their co-creation together with God. It was necessary to divide the whole territory where the Vedic people lived in different states and to destroy their culture. New preachers went to Rus. They put a new approach into practice. This time they sought out people in whom selfishness, pride dominated even just a little over the other energies of feelings. Whenever they found such a man, they tried enhancing the sense of pride within him. This is how they operated. Imagine a group of stately-looking elders arriving at the home of a happy family. But there is no attempt, as before, to preach or teach them how to live. On the contrary, they all at once bow down before the head of the household, present him with outlandish gifts, and say, "In our far-off land, we climbed to the top of a high mountain, the highest mountain on the earth. Standing at the summit, above the clouds, we heard a voice from heaven telling us about you. And it was told to us that you are the wisest of all people on the earth. You alone were chosen, and you are honored to bow down, and we are honored to bow down to you, present you with our gifts, and wait upon your words of wisdom." And if they saw the man taking their bait, they would continue their sly talk. "It is your duty to make all other people happy. The voice told us so on the mountain top. You should not waste your valuable time with other concerns. You should be in charge of people and make decisions for them, decisions that have been entrusted to you alone. And here is your heavenly headdress." At this point, a headdress decorated with precious stones was presented to the man, as though it were the grandest treasure. And so the headdress was placed upon the head of the man who now believed in his own majesty and his chosen status. And at that very moment, all the visitors fell to their knees before him in great reverence, and they began to praise heaven for the honour of being worthy to bow before this majesty. Next, the foreign visitors built him a separate house to live in that looked very much like a temple. This is how the first princes rose to power in Vedic Rus. The new prince's neighbours looked upon this man sitting on his throne in the temple as some sort of curiosity. They watched as the foreign visitors bowed before him, indulged his every whim, and plied him with all sorts of questions. At first they took this scenario for some kind of game from overseas, and some decided, either out of curiosity or out of compassion, to play along with the foreigners and with their neighbour. But people gradually got drawn into the game, and little by little they sank into a state of serfdom, and without their realising it, their thoughts turned more and more away from co-creation. It was not easy for the priests' emissaries to get the princedoms established. In the beginning, for more than 100 years, their attempts proved unsuccessful. But still, it finally came about, and the Vedic Rus was carved out into princedoms. And then events took their natural course. The princes began fighting over who was greater, and dragged their neighbours into internecine feuds. Later, historians would claim that grand princes arose who managed to join the isolated princedoms of Rus together into one mighty state. But think for yourself, Vladimir. Could that really have been so? And what kind of unification exactly do the historians have in mind? It is all very simple. In fact, yes, one prince was able to kill or conquer others, but people can be united only by culture and a way of life. The setting up of borders always indicates separation. Once a state was established, not on the basis of a cultured way of life, but on the artificial greatness of one or more people by virtue of their armies, a whole lot of problems immediately made themselves heard. How to maintain those borders and expand them as the opportunity occurred, and so arose the need for a sizable army. A large state cannot be governed by one man alone, so clerks and scribes soon appeared, and they have been multiplying each day right up to the present moment. The princes, clerks, scribes, merchants, and all their servants together form a category of people who have been separated from God's creations. Today, their functional designation is the creation of an artificial world. They have utterly lost the ability to perceive true reality and so constitute fertile soil for occultism. Only 1,000 years ago, Rus was considered pagan. Paganism still carried within itself a lingering sense of the divine Vedic culture. And with the advent of the princes and their princedoms, first little princedoms and later larger ones, the rulers found they needed a force more powerful than an army, a force capable of creating a type of man inclined to unquestioning submission to authority. Here too, the priests' messengers came to the ruling prince's assistance and offered them a suitable religion. The essence of this new development was very much to the prince's liking, though there was hardly anything new in it. It contained everything that Egypt had had 5,000 years earlier. Like the pharaoh, the prince was considered to be appointed to his position by God. The occult ministers of the new religion were his advisors. Again, just as in Egypt, everyone else was a mere slave. It was not a simple task to inculcate the new order into the minds of free people whose memories could still savour the celebrations of Vedic culture. And so once again the priest came to the prince's aid. His foot soldiers began spreading false rumours to the effect that there were pagan settlements where people were being more and more frequently sacrificed to God. It was noised abroad that pagans sacrificed to their gods not just various animals, but also beautiful girls or young men or even little children. This false rumour is still rampant amongst us today. More and more it became a source of anger to the pagan people. And now, here was this new religion being offered which placed a strict prohibition on burnt sacrifices. It talked about equality and brotherhood, exempting, of course, the princes. Thus, this new religion was, little by little, introduced into pagan Rus. Eventually, one of the ruling princes decreed that Christianity be recognized as the only true religion in the land. Rus came to be called Christian, and all other religions were banned. Now let anyone whose forebears, mothers and fathers, were called pagan just 1,000 years ago ask themselves this question: did pagans really sacrifice either animals or people to their gods? And the true picture of events will become clear to anyone who is able to do at least 9 minutes of logical reasoning. And you, Vladimir, once you have applied your own logic to the discovery of the truth, can see the facts for yourself, I should be glad to give you a little help. First, ask yourself a logical question. If pagans, as their accusers claim, actually offered up someone as a sacrifice to God, then why did the mere rumour about such offerings so greatly trouble their mind and feelings? It would have been more logical in that case to welcome such claims and enthusiastically try to repeat them, instead of greeting them with outrage and accepting the new religion's entreaties. But the people were outraged. Why? Naturally, because the pagans could not entertain even the thought of sacrificing animals, let alone people. That is why no one can come up with even a single source in support of burnt sacrifices among the people of pagan Rus. It was only the chroniclers of Christianity that claimed that. And then they never lived in pagan Rus and did not even know the language of pagan Rus. And what about the sources and manuscripts of pagan Rus itself? Some of them were hidden, some were burnt in bonfires, just as in Rome. What exactly was seditious in these scrolls? What did they disclose? Without being able to read them, everyone today can make their own guess. They would have exposed the falsity of the accusations against paganism, and they could have transmitted the knowledge of Vedism. There was more to it than the fact that none of the people of pagan Rus ever indulged in burnt sacrifices. They did not eat meat at all. They could not even imagine such a thing. They were friends of the animals. Their daily diet was varied enough, but it was strictly vegetarian. Who can come up with a single recipe from ancient Russian cuisine that even mentioned meat? No one. Even our epic folk tales tell about how the turnip was respected in ancient Rus, about how the people drank mead beer. Let anyone today, even meat eaters, try drinking this warm mead made from flower pollen and herbs. After drinking that, you will not want to eat anything else, certainly not meat. Those who force themselves to do so may find the meat will only make them vomit. Besides, judge for yourself, Vladimir. Why should anyone eat meat when all around them a whole lot of easily digestible, high-energy food was available? During the winter, bees fed on nothing but honey and pollen, and so can go the whole winter without excreting at all. The whole intake is assimilated by the bee's body, and Spitten, a drink made with boiled honey, was also served to guests directly they entered the home. And who would start eating meat after tasting a sweet drink? It was the nomads that introduced meat to the world. There was hardly any edible fruit to fend for in the prairie lands and deserts they moved about in, and this is why they ended up killing cattle, and the nomads ate the meat of those animal herds that served as their beasts of burden, animals that carried their belongings, fed them with milk, and gave their wool for clothing. Thus, the culture of our forebears was destroyed, and Rus was plunged into religion. If the people had learnt genuine religion, purely Christian, it is possible that life would have turned out differently, but the priest managed to inject his own twists into the Christian teachings, and the one religion became subject to various interpretations, and the Christian world became divided into a multitude of denominations, often in conflict with each other. The high priest spent a great deal of effort on Rus. In other places on the earth, people saw what he was doing and did not permit his preachers within their borders. Japan, China, and India did not become Christian, but the high priest won them over by another way. The age of occultism began 1,000 years ago. People all over the earth lived in the age of occultism and are still living in it today. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8. Occultism. It lasts only 1,000 years. During the age of occultism, mankind is plunged into a world of unreality. Mankind begins to direct its tremendous store of diverse energies toward made-up images and abstract worlds existing beyond the boundaries of real life. The real world, with its diversity, receives less and less of the life-creating warmth of man. It maintains its existence only at the expense of past accumulation and its original charge from the divine. Mankind ceases to fulfill its main purpose. It becomes dangerous for the universe, and planetary scale disasters take place. Today, all mankind still lives in the world of the occult, but that age ended in the year 2000. Of course, in reality, the name 2000 is a misnomer. You know yourself that only recently the traditional year count was radically changed. The latest temporal borderline represented the millionth anniversary of civilization on the Earth. And as always, a global disaster was slated to happen. More specifically, mankind was supposed to launch a new attempt toward populating the universe through its own perfection, But no disaster occurred during any year of the occult age. It took only 3 of the Vedic people who were not asleep to partially remove the soporific occult spells from people today. Remember how the hearts of those reading your books began to flutter and recall their love for the earth? They are still asleep, but the power of God's Vedic culture is coming back to them, and God is gaining new hope. While still not fully awake, they, through their love, averted a disaster. Now it will not happen on our planet. Soon all people will come out of the hypnotic occult sleep. They will start coming back to reality. Are you surprised that mankind today is either asleep under a hypnotic spell or dwelling in an unreal world? You might wonder, how can that be? Here I am, and in the cities, both large and small, there are millions of people living. Cars go up and down the streets. You should not be at all surprised by my words, Vladimir. Think about it and judge for yourself. At what times, on what day, or at what hour do people actually live in a real world? Think, for example, how many different religions there are on the globe. They all have a different interpretation of man's being and the order of the universe, and each has its own set of rituals distinct from the others. Let us say that there is indeed one religion which is truer than all the rest, but that would mean that the world's the rest of them are creating are unreal. But after all, people believe in them too, and if they believe, they live in submission to the laws of the unreal world. All over the earth, greater and greater numbers of people are wanting to have more money. But what is money? It is simply a convention. People think that everything can be bought with money. That is an illusion. No amount of money can buy the true energy of love, or a mother's feelings, or one's motherland, or the taste of fruit intended only for the one who grew it with mindful attention. As a convention, money can be used only to buy conventional, conditional love, along with a multitude of soulless things around. But in the process, you are dooming your soul to a state of loneliness. In the occult millennium, mankind is completely disoriented as to the space created by God, and people's souls simply flounder about as though in darkness. Look closely, Vladimir. Just over the past 100 years in the country where you live, look how society has kept changing its direction. There was a Tsar, the social elite functioned according to prescribed behavioural rights, and people of prominence were decorated with various emblems, medals and orders with coloured ribbons. They wore gold-embroidered uniforms, and monasteries and temples were built throughout the country where you live now. And then, all of a sudden, that was considered contemptible. Uniforms, medals and ribbons attached to them came to be considered no more than clown outfits. Temples were part of the Dark Ages. Those who served in the temples were called swindlers, and people enthusiastically sacked the temples and angrily slew the occult servers therein. Later it was announced to all that only the Soviet authorities were to blame. Yes, the authorities did officially encourage the people to do this, but then the people did not protest. They simply responded to the call of their ruling idols. After all, you know from documents existing today how in the Kuban, 42 Christian priests were brutally slaughtered, not just killed, but brutally tortured. Their bodies were tossed in cesspools. This was not just the work of the rulers. The people themselves willingly participated in such acts. The rulers' only role was to allow them to happen. As a result, priests were slain by the thousands in different parts of the country. The ones that could not run ended up renouncing their faith. Very few in those times managed to save both their life and their faith. The majority of the people in the country became sincere atheists. They changed their clothes, the emblems and ribbons on their uniforms became different, with different colours. Many analysts and historians have written books about the Soviet years, but in the future, Lenin and Stalin will be remembered for just one thing. For the first time, mankind has been shown clearly that occultism is obsolete. Even in their sleep, people do not accept occult religions. Occultism is supported only by artifice and force. But you see, it was not their faith in God that was destroyed. It was only the occultism that had infested their faith that was brought down. Over the past millennium, in Russia alone, a startling change of philosophy has managed to occur among the people as a whole. Religion became significantly denigrated, and people's faith in it was transferred to communism, though that too is a faith. Quite recently, you saw yourself how once again the people in the country where you live sharply changed their direction. The path everybody in the country had been enthusiastically following was declared to be the wrong one, and priorities changed once more. Did the people choose a new way? No way. The path is not at all clear to the people. In the unreal world of the occult, the people do not choose their own path. Someone always points it out. But who? The high priest, who still today rules the world. How does he rule the people of the modern world? And why can nobody ever overthrow him? Where is he located? Take a look. I can show him to you. The priest who still rules the world today. Now, you see an elderly man. Do not be surprised by his modest appearance. In terms of clothing and behaviour, he is indistinguishable from most other people. And as you can see, he is surrounded by ordinary things, and his house is not that big. His staff comprises just 2 servants. He has a family, a wife and 2 sons, but even his family do not know who he actually is. And yet, he does have one outward distinguishing feature. If you observe him closely, you can see that he spends the whole day in isolation, and on his face you can see the depth of his meditation. Whenever he eats or talks with his wife, although their conversations are rather rare, his eyes look as though they are concealed behind a foggy film, and even when he watches television, his eyelids are slightly lowered. He never shows surprise and never laughs. In fact, he hardly watches any television at all. He merely pretends to watch, and during this time he is deep in intensive thought. He is working out grandiose plans and exercising control of events in whole countries. He is the high priest from a dynasty of priests, having inherited from them a knowledge of the occult, which he will also be able to transmit to one of his sons. It will take him just a year to convey everything orally to his successor, whom he is training in secret without his even knowing it. The priest has long been developing specific abilities within his son. All the world's money belongs to the high priest. All the world's money works for him, including what you have in your pocket right now. Do not be surprised. I shall show you how this happens, and by what means and for what reason the high priests prefer not to live in a castle surrounded by an army of guards. Why he prefers commonplace routines to special luxury. The high priest has no bodyguards because he knows perfectly well that the more visible authority is to all, the greater the need for armed protection. Besides, there is no guarantee that any number of bodyguards, even hundreds of thousands, will succeed in protecting an earthly ruler. Indeed, there have been instances where the guards themselves betray or even kill the ruler. Besides, having bodyguards may entail a lot of problems. There are times when the ruler is compelled to submit to the guards' terms, compelled to tell the guards about his intentions, forthcoming trips, for example. With a bodyguard, a ruler is always under observation, and so meditation becomes more difficult for him. It is much simpler and more reliable to conceal one's identity. This also wards off intrigues on the part of one's adversaries, fanatics, and challengers to one's authority. Now, you may well be thinking, But how is it possible to control huge numbers of people without assistants, managers, and deputies, without drafting laws and disciplining those who fail to carry them out? It is all very straightforward. The vast majority of the people have been immersed in occultism for a very long time. The high priest knows all the tricks of occultism. He does have assistants, managers, drafters of laws, prisons, and executioners. He has armies and commanders, though not a single one of those who carry out his missions has any suspicion himself of who is secretly commanding him and by what means the orders are issued. It is a simple system of control without visible and personal contact. In cities, both large and small, of any country, there are people who all at once start to hear voices from a source they cannot pin down. And this voice from an unknown source may order a man to carry out some kind of action, and the man obeys the order. Sometimes there is a clearly audible voice. Sometimes this man does not know himself what is happening to him. It is just that he feels some kind of attraction within and he carries out the action ordered. This kind of phenomenon is known to modern science. Psychiatrists, along with other scientists, have been attempting to study it for a long time, but to no avail. Modern science classifies this kind of phenomenon as a type of mental disorder. People who go to the doctors and report hearing voices coming out of nowhere and giving them orders are invariably carted off to a hospital. What kind of hospital? A psychiatric institution. In many countries, these are very much like prisons. There are a great many of them today in America, Europe, and Russia. Patients are treated with all sorts of pills and injections to quiet the mind. This dulls their sensations, making them sleep a lot and become extremely sluggish. And some of these people stop hearing voices as such. Others feign cure in an attempt to procure their release. But not everyone who hears voices will go see a doctor. Just imagine now that someone submitting to a voice command is in charge of an atomic missile, or in command of an army, or assigned to guard a container of deadly bacteria. And this voice then gives him a bizarre order. Science has not been able to define the exact nature of this unusual phenomenon. It definitely exists today, and they are afraid to publicize it, but that does not help. In the meantime, they should have been focusing their attention on something more basic. If there is a signal receiver, there must somewhere be a signal transmitter as well. The high priest and his assistants know how to transmit voice commands. They also know what kind of man each of the many religions is capable of shaping. The priests are the originators of these religions, of occultism itself. They need it in order to control people. The fanatic who believes in the unreal world is like a biorobot predisposed to hear the voice commands and to carry out any order unquestioningly. The high priest and his assistants know how to set people at odds with each other and start wars among people of different faiths. Wars may have different specific causes, but in any war, the basic weaponry has consisted of discrepancies in people's beliefs. All technology and all artificial information channels are similarly controlled by the priests through people. And for this, they do not have to control every television broadcast themselves or look over every reporter's shoulder as he writes. They need only create a general condition whereby all media are out to make money. Television advertising, for example, has become more and more sophisticated, intrusive, and aggressive. Any psychologist will tell you that it is nothing more than aggressive mental suggestion aimed at individual viewers, often not to their benefit but to their harm. People are shamelessly told that the commercial advertising cannot be helped. That is what pays for the programs people watch. But then every TV viewer pays for all these adverts by purchasing products at the suggestion of the advertisers. Advertising costs are included in the retail price of the product. What can be more sorry than a situation like that? And money acts as a huge and powerful lever for the priest's influence. I told you that even the money you have in your pocket right now serves the high priest. Here is how it all happens. A simple pattern may be observed in the convoluted banking system we have. Money withdrawn by someone from a bank increases the bank's capital. For example, let us say Russia as a country borrows on credit from an international bank. It is then obliged to pay back with considerable interest, much more than it's originally borrowed. How is the difference made up? From the taxes you pay, or let us say, even when a pensioner buys a quarter kilo of bread, a tax is also included as a percentage of the price. And that percentage, or at least a part of it, goes to the international bank. Thus capital flourishes, but whose? The high priest's. Without even touching the capital himself, he is able to direct the flow of money into wars, occult activities, or the production of deadly medicines. His goal is simple. Pride dominates in him, and it constantly aspires to create its own world, distinct from the world God made, and hold it in subjection. And the priests partially succeed in achieving the objectives they desire. People's concerns about their everyday lives are a great help to them in this, and they themselves stir up concerns among the people and distract them. Note how when people are distracted from everyday concerns, they do not notice that less and less information is being provided them. There are stricter and stricter prohibitions on bringing up the one basic question: is the path to which all mankind is now aspiring the right one? If they could only free themselves from distraction, many might be able to come to a conclusion for themselves, seeing how every year diseases are on the rise, wars are not ceasing, and each day brings greater and greater disasters. The path we're on is doubtful, to say the least. But oh, the distractions. They do not allow for any kind of contemplation. The priest, on the other hand, is engaged minute by minute in meditation, creating designs and having them carried out by the hands of millions of people. I spent a long time listening to Anastasia's emotional narrative. I refrained from interrupting her or asking her for clarification along the way. This time I stayed longer than usual in the Taker. As I was leaving, I realised I was suffering from information overload and that it would be difficult for me to set everything down in a book. Besides, the things she said were so extraordinary, raising questions about religion and authority. In our religious denominations today, there are a great many fanatics, all kinds of them. They are ready to go after anyone who encroaches on their beliefs. What do I need these problems for? End of chapter 8.